All right, so this is a class on appraisals, and I'm just configuring the screen here just in case anyone decides to join us in the room here. So just wait, guys. I'll be starting in just a minute. All right, it looks like we have a few of us on Zoom. We'll be starting in just a second. I'm just trying to get the screen working here in this office, and then we'll be starting. Just one sec. This, and then I want 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 this. Okay. All right, guys, thank you for being here and for your patience. Today we're going to be talking about appraisals. And so feel free to unmute and talk. It's just a small group of us today. So feel free to unmute. Everyone can hear me, right? Can you guys all hear me? Okay. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask any question you want. It'll be a little easier instead of putting them in chat if you do that. So I will get started, but I don't think I'm sharing my screen right. I'm not. Let me share my screen. All right, good. Can everybody see my screen now? Just nod or give me a thumbs up. No?
Yes, now we can.
Why don't I hear anything? Let's turn up the volume. Can somebody say something?
We can see it. We can see it.
One sec, please. Looks like we got an audio problem. One sec. All right. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
But I can't hear you. Why can't I hear you? Just trying to get the audio going. All right.
We can hear you, Stephen.
Very strange. Ah. Okay, can somebody say something?
We can hear you.
And now I can hear you too. So we're awesome.
All right.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about appraisals. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about. First of all, is what do you guys want to learn about this? Can anybody share what made them interested in this class?
I have a question, Steve.
Yeah.
So when you're representing the buyer,
Yeah.
and this happened to me. So the seller's agent was in San Jose, and we needed to get the appraisal done, and she couldn't make it. So I went to open the door because I had the key for
Yeah.
the appraiser to come in. Was I wrong by doing that?
So you were there to show the property to somebody?
To open the property for the appraisers, but I was representing the buyer.
That's okay with the seller's permission and the seller's
Yes.
agent permission. It's totally okay for you to
Oh,
let the appraiser in. The appraisal is for the buyer usually. So it's totally okay.
Okay.
All right. So here's what I want to talk about on appraisals. First of all, let's talk about what an appraisal actually is and who it's for. Usually the buyer. Actually, not for the buyer at all, but for the buyer's lender. We'll get into that. How does the appraisal contingency work in the contract? How do you look out for your buyer's best interests when there's appraisal happening? How do you protect a seller when there's appraisal coming. And I want to talk a little bit about bias, appraisal bias. And that's what we're going to talk about. And of course, as I said, most of you are on Zoom, so don't hesitate to come off of Zoom, come off of mute and ask me any questions you like. It's much easier for me to respond to your questions that you are verbal than to check the chat while I'm doing this. So an appraisal is a report about the value of a property. So the value of a property, according to appraisal, they figure it out 3 different ways. They have something called the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. The sales comparison report is very similar to how we do a CMA for our clients. Not exactly the same, but they basically compare the house or the property to other properties that are similar. Unlike us, they don't have as much flexibility. They have to adhere to strict guidelines around what properties they can compare the property to. This way, sales comparison is the #1 way that appraisers use for residential resale properties. The second method they use is something called the cost approach. In the cost approach, the appraiser says, how much would it cost to rebuild the same property with the same amenities? How much would it cost in today's dollars to rebuild it? And then the third method is called the income approach. And this is really mostly for multi-unit properties or commercial properties. The income approach is how much can we rent these spaces out for or lease them out for? How much cash flow would be generated? And they use a formula to determine the value based on the cash that the property generates via leasing or renting it. A appraisal is like a snapshot you take with your phone's camera. It's at a specific moment in time. So it could change the day later. Over time, it certainly changes. That means an appraisal has a limited lifespan. If you're in a rising real estate market and the appraisal is a year old, it's not worth as much than if it were just a day old. So that's why it has a limited lifespan. But an appraisal is not a CMA. It is not a comparative market analysis like we would do. The way to think about it is a professional estimate of value by a person who is an appraiser. It is based on the specific criteria, and it is strictly regulated. It is strictly regulated by law. So what is regulated? Not all comps that we would use, not all comparable sales that we would think are good comparisons can be used. For example, we might use a comp that is 4 months old, but the appraiser may not even be allowed to use comps that are more than 3 months old, for example. We may count the garage that's been converted to a bedroom as livable space. An appraiser rarely can count unpermitted spaces as living spaces. They would have to count the appraisal, that garage room as just a bonus space. They cannot actually consider any additions made to the property that were done without a permit as anything more than bonus space. Whereas you might be marketing the property as a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, the appraiser may have to call it a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath for these types of reasons, which will lead to lesser valuation, right? Your CMA is also a professional estimate of value, but it will take into account factors that the appraiser may not even know. Maybe you really know this neighborhood really well and you're able to figure in the last 3 sales because you went to see those houses. So you don't just have the prices of them, but you know what they're like on the inside, and the appraiser doesn't. Maybe your knowledge of the neighborhood, you know something about that street that the appraiser wouldn't know. So there's some links in this slide deck to blog posts. Here's one about advising the appraiser about the property stuff that they wouldn't know. We're going to talk about that as a practice. Some of the typical discrepancies we see with appraisal. So this is a link. Comparable sales appraisers can't use. So we have these additional articles that you guys can read later. But now I have to go back. Sorry, I have to go back. Nope, wrong one. All right. So one thing to remember, that whether it's an appraised value or it's a CMA, neither one is the same as fair market value, which leads to the question, what is fair market value? Anyone want to guess? What do
Whatever
we mean?
whatever someone
Brandon.
will pay for it.
That's exactly right. Another way of saying it, Brandon, is fair market value is the price a buyer is willing to pay and a seller is willing to accept. Okay? If you have a buyer who's willing to pay something, but the seller wants more, then we do not have fair market value established, right? Every time you ratify a contract, there is an agreement on fair market value for that house. What a buyer is willing to pay and what a seller is willing to accept. So this is important because we can see scenarios where the buyer is willing to pay more and the seller is willing to take more, but the appraiser doesn't agree. Or even your comps that you ran don't agree. That's what we're going to talk about next. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a sample appraisal report that we see in the field all the time. I want you guys to remember or know that the appraisal industry hasn't caught up with the times, and they are still using a template for appraisals that is from like God knows when, but it's an old design and it looks it. So this has been blacked out to protect the innocent and the guilty. But this is the first page of an appraisal report, and it just lost my full screen mode. Let me see if I can get back to full screen mode. That's very strange. Just a sec. I'm just going to try to view it in full screen mode. So thumbnail. I don't want to throw a thumbnail. There we go. Well, that's better. Anyway. All right. This is page 1. At the top is a whole section called subject, property address, legal APN number, details about the property is in the first section. The second section called contract is what it's in contract for. So this is a house that was in contract for $365,000 in 2017. Okay, nowhere, not what you can pay for a house nowadays, but in 2017, you could buy a house. This was up in San Pablo in the East Bay. Okay, and this contract was for $365,000 in May of 2017. The next section is the neighborhood, information about the neighborhood. Is it how built up is it? What is growth like? Is it urban, suburban, rural? How much of it is built up? Is it growth rapid, stable, or slow? What are housing trends for single family homes? This report says there's stable housing, market is in balance, but most homes are marketed under 3 months. Just basic information the appraiser is using to guide their pricing thoughts. There's a little bit about other conditions serving the house, utilities and whatnot. Then the next section, we're still on page 1, gives you a description of the house with some of its amenities and features and circumstances. So we know that this is just a single family dwelling. It's detached. It's existing construction, not new construction. It's built in 1942, roughly 40 years old. It talks about what the attic looks like, what the foundation looks like, what kind of heating it has, exterior, all this detail. And, you know, we want to check these. They pull this information from the MLS, but I've seen them be wrong before. There are 5 rooms, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 840 square feet house. This is a small house, guys. Smaller than many condos, right? Then he wrote down no updates in the prior 15 years. House is in average overall condition, no deferred maintenance. That's page 1. So far, we still don't know what he thinks the house is worth. The next page is where he starts to look at comps. And when an appraiser looks at comps, the report looks like this. It's this, and the first left line is what is the feature. Then the next column, is what's true about the property that's being evaluated. And then comparable sales 1, 2, and 3. And it just has all these various things. And you can go down and you can study it and see how they're different, right? So the site, this is the lot square footage where it says site here, where it says site over here. So the property we're questioning is 5,100 square feet lot, but 2 of the 3 comparable sales are under 4,000. So it looks at all this stuff, and then the appraiser makes some adjustments. So for, this is the subject, the middle one, he adjusted by 8% upwards. And in the third one, he adjusted the other one upward by 6%. So and then there's one here that he did not adjust at all. And so the comps he got for the comps, he adjusted their sale price to the first case, 317, then 340, then 320. Then a little bit more. A little more detail. And then finally, at the bottom of page 2, indicated value by sales comparison report, 320. Indicated value by all 3 methods. So 320 by sales comparison approach, which is like a CMA. 340, 440 if they had to rebuild it at that time. And then they did not do an income approach. And then it talks about why he's giving most weight to the sales comparison. Finally, at the very, very bottom, based on a complete visual inspection of the interior and exterior areas of the subject property, defined by scope of work, statement of assumptions and limiting conditions, my opinion of the market value is that the subject of this report is worth $320,000. So when you get one of these appraisal reports, if they haven't told you in the email or the text what it appraised for, you can go look at page 2 at the bottom of the report itself, and you can see. Now, does anyone see a problem? Any problem? Yeah, Ruth, unmute.
So it's worth less than what what is the first, you said it was 365 and now it's 320.
At the sale price.
Yeah, the sale price, right?
Right.
So,
It's $45,000. You're absolutely right, Ruth. It's $45,000 below the sale price. 45,000 over 320,000 is a pretty significant discrepancy, right? 45, I'm just going to do the math, divided by 320. It's off by 15%. This appraiser is saying this house is worth 15% less than the buyer and seller in contract for. So there's more to this report, guys. There's more and more. There's some definitions, a little bit about the appraiser certification and how he's defined to do his job. All of this part looks the same. His signature, more about definitions for some of the codes he uses in other parts of the report. Then he does a section, more definitions of terms. Then he gives you other comps that he considered. There were 2 more comps he considered, number 4 and 5. And those prices came out at 334.9 and 344.9. Then he talks a little bit more about why he came to this and how he got to this. And then he signs the certification. There's some pictures. And then at the end, he has his insurance statement. No, not yet. More these are pictures of the comps. And then at the end, there's a map showing you where the house is on the street. Somewhere we're going to get to the certification. What's this? Market conditions addendum to the report, sort of a general look at the market conditions in the past 7 to 12 months, 4 to 6 months, and current time back then. And then here's his license. And that is the whole report. Oh, wait, there's his insurance. I think we're at the end. Oh, there's a sketch. He did a drawing too. Here's a drawing, and that's it. Okay, so we have a problem. We have a problem. This escrow has a problem because the appraisal was 320, but the property is its contract for 365. We're going to come back to that. So when we think about appraisals, they are usually required by all lenders. If you have a lender on the deal, the lender will require the buyer to have an appraisal. And it doesn't matter how much the loan is. Let's suppose the loan is a 50% loan and the buyer's putting in 50% cash. Doesn't matter. The lender will still require an appraisal. The appraisal is typically paid for by the buyer, who typically provides a credit card over the phone or via a web portal. There are some lenders who will pay for the appraisal, but most of them do not. If they pay for the appraisal, you can be guaranteed they'll be making a big deal about it, so you'll know. But most of them, the buyers pay. And the cost of an appraisal nowadays is usually between $600 and $800 last time I checked. The appraisal is paid for as a third-party expense, so it does not roll into the transaction. It is out of pocket. You have to remind your buyers that there are certain costs of buying a home that are non-refundable, such as home and pest inspection fees and appraisal fees. Doesn't matter if they finish the deal or not, they don't get that money back. And then there's a lot of different ways that appraisals actually take place, and how it takes place depends on the property itself, the terms of the loan, and underwriting guidelines. So in this link here, we taught there's an article about the different types of appraisals that are done. Full appraisal, a property inspection waiver, an inspection-based appraisal waiver, a desktop appraisal, hybrids. That's an article that he wrote, this blogger wrote about 2.5 years ago. Still relevant. We are seeing more and more and more property inspection waivers happening, especially for newer property. And that's great. That means you can lift, they're basically not going to send someone out to the property. Oops. All right. So why is this relevant? In the sales contract, in the RPA, there is an optional term that says the buyer has the right to cancel the transaction if the appraisal is unsatisfactory to the lender. Now, why did I write it that way? Because sometimes an appraisal is unsatisfactory to the lender because of a condition issue with the home, not because of the price. Sometimes the appraiser says, this home, I will only, assess value X if the hole in the roof is repaired, right? Something like that. So if you have the option, your buyers have an option. Do they want an appraisal contingency? It's on page 1 or 2 of the offer where you specify, I think it's page 2, do you have an appraisal contingency? If the buyer has an appraisal contingency, you will always specify the number of days they have to take action on the contingency. That is to do something. We're going to talk about the things the buyer can do in a minute. But if you write into the deal 10 days for the appraisal contingency, your buyer should be taking action by day 10. And if they don't take action by the deadline, the seller can force their hand. The seller can issue a document saying, hey, buyer, do something. And if the buyer doesn't do anything even then, the seller can arbitrarily cancel. The seller still has to give the deposit back in that case, but they can cancel. Okay? Now, if the seller doesn't force the buyer's hand with the warning, then the buyer takes as long as they take. There's no legal, the contract is still in force until such time as the buyer actually does take action. All right. So
What does it mean though? If you don't have the date, you still have to.
you have to specify number of days if you're going to have appraisal contingency. You can't leave it blank. Okay. You're going to have a number of days. So let's just examine 10 days and use 10 days. So the appraisal results come in. There are two ways. There are two results and only two results. Either the appraisal comes in at the sale price or higher, and there's no noteworthy considerations or condition issues. And normally your buyer will waive the contingency and continue with the escrow. In fact, if they don't, they might be perceived as operating in bad faith. But what if the appraisal comes in below the sale price or there are condition issues? And that is a potential issue for your buyer client, right? In our example, 365 versus 320. So if you go to the RPA section 7B, page 5, it says all of what I just said. Now, let's talk about the scenario like we had in our example of the appraisal with 320 appraisal, 365 sale price. What are the buyer's options on that last day, that day 10? What can they do? Number one, they can still waive the contingency and proceed with the sale. Even though they had the contingency and even though it came in low, the buyer can instruct their agent, that's you, to waive the contingency anyway and bring cash to the table. They will just put in more down payment money to cover the difference, more than they were going to put in. The second option the buyer has is they can cancel the deal completely. I don't want to buy this house. It isn't worth what what I negotiated with you, Mr. Seller. The appraisal says it's only worth 320 and you want 365. I'm sorry, I don't want your house anymore. The seller must return the deposit. But the buyer does not get a refund on the appraisal cost. That cleared, everyone? Deposit refunded, not the cost of the appraisal. There's a third option, of course, and that is the buyer can request a change to the deal. Anytime you negotiate something in the middle of a deal, it's an amendment. It's a change to the deal. And buyers can always try to negotiate changes. There's nothing illegal or irresponsible as you as a buyer's agent trying to change the deal. The buyer basically is negotiating with the seller and saying, listen, I still want to buy your house, but I need something to happen. He might say, Mr. Seller, lower your price to 320. So I'm in line with my appraisal. Or he might say, Mr. Seller, fix the hole in the roof so the appraisal will be a valid appraisal. Or he might say, Mr. Seller, we just got a super low appraisal in and we're going to do some other research and other investigation. We need more time. So I think we're going to deal with each. Are we going to deal with each one of these? I think so. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at a different example so you can see how the numbers work. Here is an example of a sale price of $1 million with a 10% down payment, which is $100,000, and loan financing of $900,000. But the appraisal comes in at $950,000, $50,000 below the sale price. Everyone with me? I promise you the math will be short and mostly pain-free. Okay. Because the appraised value is less, the buyer's lender will only ever do financing for 90% of the appraised value, whatever the loan was. If it was a 20% down loan, they'll do 80% of the appraised value. If it's an FHA loan, they'll do 96.5% of the appraised value. But in a 10% down scenario, the buyer's lender will only do the loan for 90% of the appraised value, not the sale price. So if 90% of the sale price is, if the appraised value is 950, 90% of that is 855. Buyer is putting in their 100,000. So that means they're going to get an 855 loan and 100,000 from the buyer is 955. And the buyer's short in this scenario is not 50,000, it is 45,000. That's the beauty of math. He doesn't need to bring 50,000. Even though it appraised 50,000 below, he only has to bring in 45 to make it good, or we only need to deal with a discrepancy of 45. So let's take the scenario where the buyer is trying to negotiate this out. We talked about them doing an amendment. Mr. Seller, we want to change the deal with you. So they might say to the seller, please reduce the price either partially or wholly to cover the gap. So if I'm representing the buyer, I might go to this listing agent and say, listen, we all want this deal to get done. We're only off by $45,000. What if you increase your, we're only off by $50,000. What if you throw in 25,000, reduce the price by 25,000, and then my buyer will make up the rest. We'll each put in 50-50, we'll be fine. You could go to the seller and say, listen, Mr. Seller, my buyer still wants to buy the house, but the appraisal says you got to fix the hole in the roof first. Or maybe he says to the buyer that you say to the buyer, Mr. Seller, my client really wants to make this work, but we need another week because the appraisal came in low. And during that time, we're going to work with the buyer's lender to redo the financing so he has more cash. Because if he did a 5% down loan, he would have enough money to cover the difference. Or Mr. Seller, we're going to use that week to dispute the appraisal. We're going to go back to the lender and ask the appraiser to relook at it because the appraiser didn't use the right comps. We think there are better comps. Or we'd say to the seller, listen, Mr. Seller, we just want to get a whole new appraisal. We are working with a mortgage broker and he has another company that he does loans with, and we can turn the whole thing around and get a brand new appraisal. We just need another week on this deal, on the contingency. By the way, you can use any of these, even if there's no appraisal contingency, you can still negotiate changes to a contract. Seller may not agree, but you can always try. Anyway, those are some of the reasons why buyer might ask for an extension. So this is an article about this as well, which goes into some of these techniques that you can use. Your lender partner should be great help here with helping you to evaluate the options for a low appraisal. And this covers everything that I just said in this article. Challenge the appraisal, bring in extra cash, change the financing to a lower down payment, negotiating a price reduction with the seller, or order a new appraisal. All of things that we just were talking about. Sorry, I need to keep moving things around on my screen to make things flow. No. And in fact, we aren't even seeing as many appraisal shortfalls as we used to. It happens from time to time. Okay. So what are the best practices for you guys when you're representing buyers? I want to share with you some things that I would recommend you do when you're working with buyers and in regard to appraisals. First of all, you always want to be ahead of the situation. You always want to be ahead of when anticipating potential issues that could come up during a deal and getting on top of it. So if you are worried that the appraisal, the amount your client wants to offer might result in an appraisal problem, you want to go over the comps and talk about it with your buyer before you write the offer. The buyer wants to write at $1 million and they want an appraisal contingency and all the comps are at 850, 900. You need to have a conversation about it's okay for you to write at $1 million, but we might have an appraisal issue, especially if they don't want an appraisal contingency. They need to know how much money they might be putting on the table if it comes in low, especially if they waive the appraisal contingency. You want to verify that they have cash to close for different appraisal outcomes if they have to bring the money to the table, if they're going to, especially if they're not going to have the contingency. You also want to talk with the buyer's lender about options available for your client. Sometimes reducing the down payment isn't an option. You want to get in touch with the appraiser before they come to the property, ideally, and find out if they know the neighborhood. Some lenders, especially ones who don't work locally, will bring out any old appraiser who may not know the neighborhood, may not know the property styles, or that may not have experience in that area, which makes their appraisal standard maybe not as good as what we need. Also, not just the neighborhood, but the type of construction of the property. Another thing you should do is attend the appraisal in person, bringing your own comps and any seller improvement list. So the appraiser, who may not be aware of all the work the seller did on the property, can see it. An appraisal visit is not a home inspection. They basically measure the rooms, make sure the furnace turns on, make sure the appliances are all there, and they're out of there. It's not a home inspection. So if you have data that all the electrical was upgraded just last year and there's a brand new panel, that's something I'd want my appraiser to know because it impacts value, right? There's a whole blog post from the same source on sharing comps with appraisers. Before you write your offer, if you're thinking it's going to be competitive, then consider talking about the waiver of the appraisal contingency with your client, or a partial waiver, a partial waiver. So section 3L2, which I excerpted in here, has this column, the third column from the left, that says appraisal contingency based on appraised value at a minimum of purchase price, or, and then you check a box and you put in an amount. So let's suppose your buyer can't waive the appraisal contingency because if it comes in 100,000 below, they don't have enough money to buy the house and cover it. But you want to be competitive. So maybe you put in the sale offer price, and then this number here, you put in 50,000 below it. Whatever the extent of cash on hand that they're willing to invest in an appraisal shortfall would allow them to have an appraisal contingency, but would have it be a partial appraisal contingency. So for example, you're in contract for $1 million and your buyer says to you, as long as it appraises at 950 or better, I'm okay. I'll pay it. But if it appraises at 945, I don't have enough money for that. So you'd put 950 in L2 and you would not check this box. By the way, if your buyer is using VA financing or FHA financing, they may not be able to waive the appraisal. Check with their lender. Check with the lender, okay? Anyone using FHA or VA. FHA, guys, is Federal Housing Administration. These are loans with 3.5% down. VA means Veterans Administration, and these are for veterans and surviving spouses, and those are 0 down loans. Now, let's suppose you represent the seller. Sometimes you represent the seller in these scenarios. If your buyer's offer includes an appraisal contingency, you need to talk to the list seller about what could happen. Mr. Seller, the buyer has an appraisal contingency. If the appraisal comes in at asking price with no condition issues, then we're fine. They'll waive their contingency. But Mr. Seller, if the property does not appraise, or there's some condition issue, then the buyer is going to potentially come back to us and want a price reduction. Here are some of the things the buyer might do, and look at it from that perspective with your client before they accept the offer. If you're the listing agent, it is even more helpful for you to attend the appraisal in person, armed with comps and a list of seller improvements and perhaps knowledge of the house 2 doors down that is not as good a comp as it looks like it is on paper. your seller and the seller's lender partners, maybe for a house they're buying or maybe who they have a relationship with, might be able to help out too with new financing options. So if that's an option, you might want to just have that sort of idea in your seller's mind that if the idea is to keep the deal together and we have a motivated buyer, we might be able to help them out by connecting them with our resources.
Do sellers order?
Yeah, the seller wouldn't, because if they, so the question in the room is, should the sellers order the appraisal ahead of time? No, for several reasons. Number one, buyers need appraisals because their lenders require it. So if your buyer that gets into contract with you is all cash, you'll have wasted your money because a cash buyer won't need an appraisal normally. But also, if a buyer is doing a certain type of financing, they are going to maybe have an appraisal, a waiver by the lender. There may be a property exception and they don't even need to pay for an appraiser to come out. So the seller wouldn't normally go ahead on that. Okay. Usually the only reason sellers get appraisals is if they're trying to evaluate the state for tax purposes. Okay. Any questions about anything we've covered so far? Because I'm just going to shift gears a little bit. Any questions from the Zoomers? You folks on Zoom? No? Okay, let's talk about appraisal bias. So we have a problem in our industry, and we have had for many, many decades, with bias and discrimination. And appraisers are as prone to being biased and discriminatory as anybody else. And so what appraisers might do, either on purpose or just because they don't know better or they're not aware, they may discount or promote the value of the house because of neighborhood or owner possessions that are visible at the time of inspections, or things that have nothing to do with the value based on a fair comparable sales analysis. In 2022, there was a report that showed nationally that 12.5% of appraisals for homes purchased in majority Black neighborhoods and more than 15% of homes in majority Latino neighborhoods came in below the contract price, compared to only 7.4% of appraisals in predominantly white neighborhoods. This is as big, close to a smoking gun as you can see. And I don't think much has changed in 4 years. That is why the contract has Section 29 in it. Section 29 at the top of page 15 specifically talks about appraisal bias. And it even has a phone number you can call to complain, or how to file a complaint. It's at the bottom of Section 29B. Because it's illegal. It's illegal to discriminate. Like, for example, when we list a home for sale, we always tell the sellers, take away all your personal pictures. Take away your religious paraphernalia in the house. Take away your political stuff in the house. Because some buyers will be, some buyers and certainly appraisers might bring their own personal biases to the table when they visit the house and draw judgment from what they observe in the house. So you want to be careful. And so as listing agents, we tend to go for a vanilla approach, if the owner is living in the property. Now, of course, if it's vacant and staged, you don't have that issue. There are 2 links in this PowerPoint slide deck. One is a course called The Color of Real Estate that Keller Williams has that talks about bias in real estate. And the other one is a course about real estate bias from a documentary by Newsday. It's a YouTube video. It's all about these agents, these people who posed as buyers and met with real estate agents and saw how they were steering them to and from certain neighborhoods. And anyway, understanding bias is important, whether you're dealing with appraisers or real estate agents. Anyway, so that is the main part of the presentation. If you click on this QR code, you can get a copy of the slide deck, which has those links in it. But I'm opening it up now for anyone who has any questions about how to manage appraisals.
So I have a question, Stephen. When I went to that appraisal, the appraiser asked me how many, what did he say, envelopes I have received, or how many, I guess he was saying how many requests for the property.
Did he
And
think you were the listing agent?
yeah, he thought, how does that make a difference when they ask that? Why do they ask that?
So they're not, when you went there, I wasn't there, but what he was probably asking for is disclosure packages. How many packages of disclosures had the seller had requests for? And if you get that question and you are not the listing agent, you should send them back to the listing agent.
Okay.
And I think what the appraiser was probably trying to get a sense of is how much demand there was for the property. But I think you're also right in pointing out that whether there's demand for the property or not, that has nothing to do with what it should be valued at.
Mhm.
The value an appraiser is going to assign is going to be based on the comparable and the sales comparison approach they use. And the fact that there's a lot of interest in the house is merely color. It isn't really relevant to establishing the value.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering why would they ask something like that?
Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
question to ask them.
Thank you.
Do you guys, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Does, wait a minute. So does anyone else have any other questions? And then I'm going to ask. Oh, and Vanessa had a question.
Yes, I did.
What does APV? So, APV after, so I think you're talking about, after improvement value. I got there's when an investor is buying, they're often trying to figure out what is the home going to be able to be sold for after I make improvements, not what its condition is today. And appraisers wouldn't look at that. Appraisers are going to evaluate the home based on what it looks like at the time of when they're doing their appraisal.
Got it. All clear. Thank you.
So do you guys feel that this discussion is going to be helpful for when you're talking to buyers and sellers about appraisals?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the whole point. So I'm glad about that. I appreciate your time. If no one else has any other questions, we're going to end it. And if you sent in the QR code, if you did the QR code thing, then I'll make sure you get a copy of the presentation with all those links. And I will see you guys next time, whenever it is. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so much.